Hi everyone, I want to start talking to you about our knit-alongs and giving you a step-by-step guide as to how you can get the most out of it, and if you're new to our knit-alongs, what you need to do before the cast on date. So we have got 5 main points that we want you to think about or to work through before we start casting on, so that when the first clue comes out, you are totally ready to go. So the first one is going to be fairly obvious, but sometimes because it's in a few different places, you may need some help, and it's to download your pattern. The reason you may need to think about a bit is because there's a few different places to download, and you may also think that, oh, this is a knit-along, I don't need to look at it until it starts. But it's an information PDF when you start, first of all, which will have sizing details, yarn details, gauge details, and if it is for a garment, it'll have the schematic. So there is loads of information to get started with. So I would very, very strongly recommend that you make sure to download it and look through it before you get started. So in terms of where you can download it, it's going to depend on where you bought it. So the first place that you may have found it is in Ravelry. And in that case, you go to your Ravelry library and you just go ahead and download it. All subsequent updates or clues as they come out will be sent out as updates, and you'll get an email and they'll land in your Ravelry library. So that's the first one. Second spot you might have it is if you purchased it through our website on Stolen Stitches. When you've got an account there, you can go in and you'll find all your downloadable files in the download library. So you can download it there and it'll get updated with each new clue there. And the third spot is in our classroom, or where our workshops are hosted, which is Teachable. That's a separate account, and when you're looking through the video workshops, you'll need to log in there. You will get an automatic invite for knit-alongs through Teachable. If you were on Ravelry, you'll need to go and actually make an account and log in separately. But in there, there's going to be a section that will talk about pattern downloads, and you can download your pattern there and it'll be updated each time. If you want some more information on how all of this works, just take a look at the link below there and click in. So that was 1. We're now on to 2. And once you've downloaded, the next thing is you want to pick your yarn. Picking your yarn is probably one of the most fun parts because all of the possibilities are open. You could pick kind of anything. We've obviously, whatever we've designed the actual pattern with, we're going to have kits of that yarn or something similar available on the Stolen Stitches website. You may have yarn in your stash that you want to pull out that looks like it's going to be a good match, or you may want to go to a local yarn store and pick it out in person. So with all of those, you have to make the decisions on the yarn type, the color, and how best it's going to match up with the pattern. Pay close attention to the type of yarn, whether it's woolen spun or worsted, the kind of fibers that are in it, because all of those are going to have an impact on how it's going to behave. If you need a little bit more help on picking your yarn, then go take a look in the link below there and it will give you some details on that. So that's number 2. 3, we're going to take a look at swatching, which kind of includes picking your needles, I suppose, as well. All needles are not made equal because the different fabrics of the, I was going to say fibers, fabrics of the needles, like whether they're wood or whether they're metal, actually has a big impact on how the yarn flows as you're knitting it. So if your swatch isn't what you expect it to be, or the yarn is not flowing nicely, or you don't like the feel of it, I would suggest trying a different type of needle, because sometimes it makes a very big difference in what it feels like to knit. So that's, I find, very, very important. So that's the next thing you want to make sure that you take a look at. And then when you're swatching, if you know you're always a tighter or a looser knitter, you may want to immediately adjust from the actual needle size on the pattern. But if you're pretty standard in your gauge that you get, then just start off with the suggested needle size and go from there. Your swatch gives you lots of information. It obviously gives you the size and lets you know if you're going to be able to match the gauge of the pattern and thereby get the right size. It's going to tell you whether you like the fabric. Does it feel good? How does it feel on, when you're actually knitting it? And it is very important for learning a stitch pattern. So if you're doing a full garment and there's a lot of different stitch patterns, by swatching each in the beforehand, you are learning the stitch pattern, and then when you incorporate it into a much bigger piece on your garment, you won't have to think so much about the stitch pattern because you've got it sitting on the back of your head. So that is more valuable than you probably realize it is. So do not underestimate how important it is. If you want a little bit more help on swatching, you know, like how you'd swatch in the round or fake in the round, how to measure your swatch, things like that, just take a look in the link down there and there'll be lots more information. So that was 3. We're moving on to number 4. For number 4, it is about actually measuring our gauge. So it's tied a little bit with what we were talking with the swatching. You have to be able to sit down and look at your swatch and figure out, is the gauge correct? So if the fabric is nice, but the gauge is not correct, then you may need to kind of go back to the start of the drawing board and pick a different yarn, either a heavier or a looser yarn, depending on which end your gauge came out at. If the fabric is not correct and you need to make it tighter or looser, then you may want to adjust your needle size. So then if you get a nice fabric, but the gauge is not correct, you've got 2 options. Go back to the start and pick a different yarn, or alternatively, you can go and experiment with different sizes and recalculating the gauge or the sizes that you will get for your gauge. So I've got a little bit more information on this on a few of my blog posts. If you want to read more into this, come take a look at the link below. So that's 4. And number 5, picking your size, figuring out what size you want to knit. So if you know your body size, and make sure you measure, or you get somebody to help you measure your body so that you know your shoulder widths, your bust size, your dimensions as to where your waist hits and things like that. Then you compare that to the schematic if you are knitting a garment, and you pick one where you're getting the closest match. Tied in with that is, how do you like your garments to fit? Do you like them loose? Do you like them tight fitting? So you can kind of play around with that. And you may want to make some other adjustments. If you've got narrow shoulders relative to your bust, you may want to downsize, but then perhaps add a little bit of extra ease at the bust. So there's a lot of different factors at play when it comes to picking your size. If you want a little bit more discussion about that, or to read a bit more in depth, then come take a look at the link down there. So those are the 5 things I would suggest that you do before you start the knit along, because then you'll be all ready. You'll have your swatch, your size, your needles, your yarn ready to go when that first clue comes along. And do make sure that you log in and join our Knit Hub community, because that's where you're going to get a chance to talk with other knitters. They're going through every stage of this project at the same time as you, so they may have figured out an answer to a question that you're just kind of sitting there puzzling over, and it's going to give you a huge amount of support and hopefully get you over the humps along the way. And of course, I will be there to answer questions, as will the Stone Stitches team. So we'll be jumping in a couple of times a day to make sure that any questions that come up along the way get answered. So have fun with your knit along, and thank you for joining us.